It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Mike Anthony. Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well, Douglas. Thanks very much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. What exactly do you do? Are you an actor, a bartender, an author, or all of the above?
Sort of all of the above, yeah. I mean, I had initially planned on being a high school science teacher, actually, and then I ended up going into acting instead.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, as most actors do, I took a day job because, you know, acting isn't always most lucrative profession. And my day job was bartending, which I've now been doing on Broadway for the past about 14 years. And then I started to do more writing as well.
Actually, I studied acting in New York in 1981 to, was it 80 to 82, I think, at the American Academy. It's been so long now, I'm barely remembering it. But and I remember the joke was when you would ask people what they do, and they say, oh, I'm a singer, dancer, model, waitress.
Right. It's exactly right. I tell people I'm an actor, bartender, mostly bartender.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So have you done any acting at all? I mean, have you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm a professional actor in Actors Equity Association.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, I don't do much of it anymore since I started working for Hamilton. That sort of took over my life, but I do regional theater. So you chances are you haven't seen me in anything.
Okay.
Unless you watch, Shakespeare at small theaters in the Northeast.
Well, no, I haven't been to one of those in many, many years, but
Okay.
I have gone before. The Shakespeare Festival, I think that was where was that? That was like way in western Massachusetts someplace they had it.
There are a bunch of Shakespeare festivals, so it depends. Yeah. Oh, I know you might be talking about Williamstown in Massachusetts.
I think that's the one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great one. Great one.
So we're going to talk about your book today, right? Love, Dad, How My Father Died Then Told Me He Didn't.
Which has nothing to do with any of the other things I do in my life.
Okay. Except for the writing part, right?
Exactly.
I'm just curious, did you start writing because of COVID, or were you doing it before that?
I've always done a little bit of it. The way that my first book came to be, I had started posting stories on Facebook, and they kind of went viral, and people started to ask to have them collected into a book form. So that's where my first book, Life at Hamilton, which is about my experiences at Hamilton, that's where that came from. But yes, during COVID, we've been shut down on Broadway since last March, so we're coming right up on a year now. And it just happened to fall in the time that this book, I had time to write these books. And the book that we're talking about today, Love, Dad, which is about the experiences I had after my dad passed. I'm also involved in the Netflix series Surviving Death, which is a 6-part documentary series about evidence suggestive of the survival of consciousness beyond death. A book began to make sense because the Netflix series just barely scratches the surface of what happened with me and my family, and the book fills in the rest of that story.
Okay. Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about what happened with your father?
Sure. Yeah. My dad in 2011 passed, and it was completely shocking to us. He was 60 years old, but he was a very young 60. We thought my dad was among the healthiest members of our family, and we thought he had decades left to live. And we were incredibly close, my dad and I, and my whole family. And my dad was sort of the center, of our family, and losing him was a completely devastating experience. My family was left in total ruins, it felt like, unsure of how we were going to move forward. And sort of out of the blue, out of nowhere, just a couple of days after his funeral, we were contacted by a medium, a person who claims that they are able to communicate with the dead, to say that my father had contacted her and was desperate to get a message to us that he was okay and that he had survived the death of his body. So, most people, mediumship, I was familiar with from the show Crossing Over with John Edward back when I was in high school. And then now people know about the Long Island medium, that's sort of out there in the popular culture. And that was all that I knew of mediumship. But typically people will seek a medium out, right, if they're looking for that sort of a thing. In our case, it was kind of dropped into our laps. And that's where the book begins.
So the medium contacted you,
right? Yeah, it was I tell the story in detail in the book, but this was a total stranger. To this day, I've never met this woman in person, and through a distant family member, she was friends with a second cousin of mine, a guy that I barely even knew, so it was as though my dad, according to this medium, he died, came out of his body, and took a look around, and it was just found the closest medium that he possibly could that was in any way connected to our family. And the closest he could find was a woman who was friends with a second cousin.
That's wild. That is incredibly wild. How long after his body died did this occur?
It was probably a week and a half after he died, because it was just a day or so, a couple of days after his funeral, that this phone call came in to my mom's house.
The phone call came to your mom's house. Okay, so I mean, your father knew the right person to contact. Yeah, I guess he did.
And as we briefly chatted about, I've always loved science, to the point that I had initially planned on being a high school science teacher. And, science states rather unequivocally, at least mainstream science, that when the body dies, that's it. That's the end. When the brain stops receiving oxygen, the sense of self, which according to mainstream science is just an illusion created by chemical reactions. It's all just chemical reactions. And once those chemical reactions stop happening, you're gone, and that sense of self is gone, and you disappear as though you'd never existed. I mean, that's what mainstream science has to say. And I've never fully believed that. I've always been, though I love science, I've always felt like it has limits, and I've always had a sense that there's a lot more going on to the universe than we can understand, and that our science is capable of reaching. It was my sense. But when my dad was suddenly gone, the weight of what the scientific community has to say about death hit me like a ton of bricks. It threw me into a complete existential crisis, thinking that if someone as wonderful and loving as my dad, if all of the wonderful things that he ever was could simply disappear, like he'd never even walked the planet, then what was the point of anything at all? So that's the point that I was at when this stranger contacted us to say that mediumship is a real thing, and that she was one of them, and that my dad was there, speaking to her. But given my scientific bent, it was going to take a lot for me to believe that. So that call coming into the house was just the very beginning of a long journey that led me to where I am now.
Well, so what did you do after that? Did you start investigating this more?
I did, very much so. First of all, I spoke with this woman, and frankly, the initial conversation, I was simply trying to figure out if she was sane. To be honest, I was just, what's this one woman's mental state? And it became clear during our very long conversation over the phone that this woman, at the very least, believed what she was telling me. I had no doubt after that conversation that this was not something she was lying about. She wasn't looking for money. There was no financial reason to be doing this. It seemed to me that she was a very compassionate, loving, smart too, very smart woman. who truly believed what she was saying. And then not long after that, just a couple of days after that, I shared that story with my sister, about the conversation I'd had with this woman. And my sister was driving to work a couple of days after that, listening to the radio. And she happened to catch a morning radio show that had a segment with a medium, a woman named Angelina Diana, who's located here in Connecticut, where we live. And this struck Jen as quite a coincidence that just after this medium calling our house and me having this conversation with her, that Jen would then hear this, Jen is my sister, would hear this professional medium on the radio. So she contacted her and set up a reading. So this professional medium was now going to be coming to our house to do a reading with us. And that was my chance to begin really sort of looking into this. And the way that I did it was I decided to do a little casual experiment where I would talk to my dad and come up with a code word, basically, that I would need this woman to say. So it would be something that was between just my dad and I would need this woman to say it. So I was standing earlier that day, I was in my dad's house getting it cleaned out, and this memory suddenly came back to me that when we were little kids, my dad would help my sister and I fall asleep by playing with our hair at night. And it would be something that we'd make the poor guy do for hours until his hand was aching. He would play with our hair. And that memory, for some reason, came rushing back to me that day. So I said, okay, Dad, if this is real, I need you to have this woman mention my hair. It doesn't matter what else she says. I don't care how incredible she is. If she doesn't mention my hair, I'm not going to be able to believe that this is real. And now my hair, I should say, is utterly average. There's nothing at all about my hair that a stranger would come in and say, oh, there's got to be a story about this guy's hair. It's completely, utterly brown, average hair.
When you started talking about your hair, I was like, you don't have like Art Garfunkel hair or anything, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. No, because just short, brown, completely uninteresting, unremarkable hair. Yeah.
Okay.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Love coffee, huh? But wait a minute. It seems like every time you finish a cup of coffee, you get all of these side effects along with it. Heartburn, digestion, upset stomach, acid reflux. As the world's first and only organic acid-free coffee, Tyler's Coffee is able to provide a healthier option in the solution for more than 100 million individuals who have sensitive stomachs or suffer from acid-related modalities. This is Tyler's acid-free coffee. Coffee without the consequences.
Hi, this is John Morgan, production supervisor for DJC Productions. You're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
So she comes to the house that night and she does a reading which lasts for about an hour and a half or 2 hours, and it's remarkable. My scientifically oriented brain was reeling, trying to understand what she was doing. How could she be doing this? Because according, again, to skeptics, to mainstream science, this woman has to be lying somehow, right? She can't actually be talking to my dead dad because he doesn't exist anymore, according to the science. So how is she doing what she's doing? I remember looking around to see if I had forgotten to take a picture down because I had sort of scrubbed the house as well of any identifying information, to make sure that she couldn't easily be cheating. So we were all, by the end of it, crying. We're all in that living room weeping because we're convinced by the end of it that something miraculous is happening. Even me and my skeptical nature, I'm convinced something's happening that science has not yet come to understand. And now, if she was a snake oil saleswoman, right? If she was a con artist, she had done a remarkable job. Everyone in that living room was crying. They're all going to leave and they're going to tell all of their friends, and she's going to get a ton of work out of this. So if you're a professional con artist, that's when you leave. Don't press your luck. The mission is accomplished. But instead, right before she was leaving, she stopped what she was saying, and sort of in the middle of another thought, she stopped and she looked at me and she said, "Your dad wants to talk about your hair?" And it actually knocked the wind out of me for a moment. I gasped. I couldn't breathe for a second. And my mom and my sister are saying, what? Because I hadn't even told them. It was completely just between my dead father and me. And so once she said that, now I realized I needed to look much more into this.
Well, I've interviewed various people on this topic, and when you mention this idea that science doesn't believe it, science does not believe in the afterlife, the problem is that most of the rest of the world does, in one form or another, through religion. Now, religion cannot be proven, but science has not disproven it either. So
right.
I'm going to go with the majority. I'm going to go with the herd on this one. And because it manifests itself in different ways in different cultures and different religions, you've got sort of the spiritual New Age people who refer to it as a collective consciousness, okay, that we're all connected. And actually, it's not so New Age. I mean, the native indigenous peoples of America and South America, they've always believed it. They've believed it for centuries.
Yes.
Then you've got the Christians who believe in heaven and hell, which is, a different version of that. Then the Buddhists believe in reincarnation, that you simply move to a different type of body, and depending on how good or bad you were. The one I like, I was reading the Thai Buddhist book, and it said the best one you can come back is either an elephant or a lion. They said those
or
are the
what,
two.
Sorry?
Oh, or a lion. A lion.
Oh, okay.
And the worst one you come back is a mosquito. Like, apparently you're not, in the Thai version of it, you're not allowed to come back as another human being. You come back as a different life form.
Right.
So I always found that to be interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right. Here in America, we're such a secular country typically, just sort of in general. And you're right. It's not a part of our lives. Death and dying in the afterlife is not a part of our lives in the way it is in other places and the way that it's been in previous cultures, right? I mean, of course, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, in previous cultures, it was completely integrated into their life. The afterlife was. But to go back to science for a second, what I would end up being shocked to discover is that there is an enormous amount of science out there, suggestive of, at the very least, the consciousness's independence from the human brain. At the very least, there's a ton of evidence saying that consciousness is not confined to the skull. And so the evidence is so strong, in fact, that I ended up being stunned that it wasn't taught, and that it's not on the nightly news. I mean, that's how strong some of this evidence is.
Well, imagine now we can go into the tinfoil hat realm. Imagine if they did come out on the nightly news and say that somebody or some organization or some institution has categorically confirmed life after death. What do you think that would do to planet Earth?
I was just talking with someone else about this idea. There was a movie made recently with Robert Redford where that is explored, that question, where science completely proves unequivocally that there is life after death. And in that movie, then mass suicides start happening.
You bet.
Which is obviously not something that I am condoning here at all. But I don't know. I tend to think that, or at least I'll say how it affected me. It has lightened my life. It's made my life feel lighter. There's a levity. In the book I write about the show The Good Place, which is on Netflix right now, a popular show that explores life after death. And in it, one of the main characters is talking to this angel. This angel is this eternal figure. And she's trying to explain to him what it's like to be a human being. And he's not grasping it because he's eternal and he knows he's eternal. And she says to him, we all know about death. So we're all a little bit sad all the time. And that resonated with me, like death has always been somewhere in the back of my mind. Even as a little kid, I remember I loved my parents so much. And every once in a while, I would let the thought creep in, well, what about when they die someday? Like when we lost my grandfather, my father's father, that's when death first really came into my life. And, that really bothered me, the idea that there would come a day when my dad and mom wouldn't be here anymore. So it's always back there somewhere. And coming to the place that I'm at now, where I now believe without a doubt that we are much more than our bodies and that life in some form does continue beyond the demise of the body, it's just lightened my load. I now truly do believe that my dad is with me in some sense, that he's here, that I have not lost him forever. And it's just made me a happier person. And so that's my hope sort of in writing the book, is just to put the idea out there for people that there is evidence, that I hope people look into it for themselves. That's also one of the main points of the book, is that I'm not here to, this is something you need to look into for yourself. But my hope is that it can bring a modicum of comfort to people's lives.
Let me hit on two things, and then we got to kind of wrap this up. The first thing is, how long has your father been gone?
2011, so 10 years.
Okay. Does he show up in your dreams?
Oh, yes. Only like 3 of them have been remarkable dreams. I dream about him a lot, but 3 of them were of a different nature. Okay.
Now, in your dreams, is your father hard to find in the sense that, like, there's a mist, or you're trying to talk to him, but he doesn't hear you, but you can see him? Or do you know what I mean? Something like that?
I do know what you mean. No, I think in some of them they're like that the ones that I don't remember very clearly, the only 3 that I remember very clearly, in the dream, I have forgotten that he died, and then I become aware in the dream, oh my God, wait a minute, you're dead. And then I realize, yeah.
Okay. All right. No, that's interesting, because the one that I hear a lot is he comes in through whoever it is, mother, father, grandmother, comes through in a dream, but they're difficult to communicate with because they're not, there's mist or fog or something, and they're trying to get to him and their legs won't work, or, all those different kinds of scenarios, right? The second thing has to do with mediums. And how it's been explained to me is that it's simply a person who has developed that sense. We all have it. And what is the science says we only use 1% of our brain capacity or something like that, or even less than that. And all you have to do is, if you have a dog or a cat, it pretty much confirms that, because here's a creature that has very limited intellectual capacity in the sense of language, in the sense of, I don't think there's ever been a dog that's been able to create a vaccine for cancer. I don't think that's happened, right? But they can smell a hot dog a quarter of a mile away.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And they can hear things that we can't hear, frequencies that we can't hear. And it's just because of their senses are set up differently than ours, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the idea that somebody can speak with the dead or connect into the collective consciousness, I think is completely possible. And it is completely probable that we could all do it if we could hone those senses. Now, there isn't really a class that you can take to do that. You know, they don't have one at the strip mall on a yoga mat.
Right. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And most of the mediums that I work with, that I've done testing with, they all say that this is an ability that people can hone if they practice it. And I completely agree with you when you mentioned the brain. We're barely at the tip of the iceberg understanding the brain, right? So who knows what the brain is capable of? Yeah, completely agree.
We do have to wrap this up, unfortunately. I know we could have gone on. Do you have a website that you want to give out for your book or personal website?
Sure, MikeAnthony.com.
Oh, that's easy enough. Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on. This was a nice conversation, and we will be seeing you in a month on the VE show, yeah?
Look forward to it, yeah. Thank you so much.